Hello and welcome to the Naru FastCast with your hosts, Dave and Josh Masson.
Pull up a chair and listen to us discussing fasting and health-related topics.
So, good to have you back again for another episode, mate.
Another one, I know. 2 in a row. What's going on?
Anyway, how are you? You right?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Good.
What you got to talk about today? I'll let you go first this time. I feel like I rambled last time, so...
There was just basically a you show last time.
It was very dominant about me.
It was an hour and 24 minute podcast. I think I spoke for about 19 of them, and I feel like... Don't worry, it's a little bit shorter today. So I have... Probably, if you go to our website, you'll be able to find it, actually. I've just recently finished writing a blog, and it's on HIIT training because I don't like HIIT training because it involves max effort, and quite often I like to stay in the comfort of what I do rather than max effort. But I was reading it and something came up that I just felt like I could not ignore. It was so... I mean, the results were so incredible. I was like, well, I can't not do that, and I've read it. So basically, one part of the stuff that I've been reading was about a high interval training study done on 113,000 men, and they basically tracked them over 2 years. So they're 50-year-olds, and what they did is they assigned them a training protocol. Okay, and the training protocol ended up after about 6 months being 3 to 4 days a week of high intensity training, which is kind of within your like zone 3 to zone 5. So anywhere from sort of 75% up to sort of max heart rate type of thing. And then one session a week, they would do this session called Norwegian 4x4. And what that is 4 minutes of 80% heart rate. So, which is quite hard. It's quite a lot hard.
Yeah.
So 4 minutes, 3 minutes rest, and then you repeat that obviously 4 times. So quite intense, but your heart rate needs to go right back down in that sort of 3 minute resting period. And what they did is they scanned everyone's heart at the start of the study. Okay, they wanted to see whether it would have an effect on the cardiovascular makeup of the heart. So they wanted to see whether it would become less stiff, it'd be more perfused, it would slightly grow, all these different types of things they took, all these metrics they took, and they found that the 50-year-old heart reduced to look like a 30-year-old's heart after 2 years.
That's crazy.
And it then was like, I was like, this is nuts. Like, how does like no one know about this? You know, and because obviously with my open heart surgery, I was like, God, I'm gonna have to do this. And what I'd previously, I think I sort of talked about this at the end of the podcast, but it was obviously I'd been talked at for an hour and a half, so I was overwhelmed. But what basically I had said previously, and I think I'd written it in a blog actually, I'd applied this 80-20 rule. So most athletes are training 80% in zone 2, and they are then doing 20% in zone kind of 3 and higher, so sort of high intensity training. Thing is, an average athlete's doing like 40 hours a week of training. So between sort of say 30 and 40 hours a week of training, and then when you try and apply that to if you look at a committed exerciser in the literature, they would say that's anywhere between sort of 6 to like 10 hours of training. So that's 6 to 10 hours of sort of exercise. It's quite a lot in a week, and then because when you look at the proportion of that high intensity, that's probably going to account for, I don't know, say like 4 or 5 hours of that over the week. So still doing a huge amount of high intensity training. So when you take that and apply it to the average person, that split doesn't really work. So when I was like reading, I sort of realised that the kind of best split when it comes to looking at your exercise should be around about 30% high interval training, which is great because obviously you can do it in a short period of time. You need to have another 30% for zone 2, because it's all about how you can improve your mitochondria level, so the number of mitochondria in the muscles, because that will then aid fat burning. And there's also, the more that you engage your mitochondria, it's better for kind of generation of energy as well. And then you want to have around about 30% of that in resistance training. So that split for someone that doesn't have time for a huge amount of exercise is like a perfect split. You kind of have those runs where you can go out and do, 180 minus your age gives you your zone 2 training. And then if you wanted to do high intensity interval training, it can be those sort of splits. So those, you could do a sprint for a minute and then rest for a minute, sprint for a minute and rest for a minute. Or you could go out for a longer run and just be in your zone 3 the entire time. So just beast it. So again, it's more about sort of intensity rather than always so much about the time. So if your intensity is less, you need to do more time to create intense. And in doing all this, I just sort of like, it's kind of part of the story, because I was reading this and it started sort of getting onto things about lactate. And I used to sort of like lactate was a byproduct and it wasn't really useful. And so the thing is with lactate is that it's actually does things like stimulates the release of like BDNF, brain derived entropic factor, which helps with like neuroplasticity, memory. And then it also, I didn't realize this, but when they were looking at how it can influence your kind of brain function, is that lactate actually crosses the blood-brain barrier and goes up into the brain. And what it basically does is the lactate can be used as the brain. So apparently in exercise, the brain does a similar thing. It actually gets stressed like all the other organs in the body do, and it works harder during exercise. So when the brain is using glucose, when this molecule comes in, lactate, and lactate's obviously distributed into the systems, not just in the muscles, it actually goes into the circulatory system. So the brain then gets this kind of dump of lactate that it can start using, and then what it does is it allows the glucose molecules that would normally be used by the brain to be used to make things like glutathione, which is like one of the most potent antioxidants in the brain and in the body really. So they sort of started looking and thinking, right, well, how can this then help with sort of early onset dementia and Alzheimer's and stuff? And what they found was, we talked about this, and I've done a blog on it as well, and we've talked about this previously, that the biggest, the first cause of dementia or onset of Alzheimer's or any form of reduction in your mental capacity usually starts with a breakdown of the blood-brain barrier. So that sort of the brain has got like a barrier that conceals it, a bit like the gut has. The gut's got a barrier, and it obviously helps to filter things going in that are sort of neurotoxics and neurotoxins, things like that. What happens is they've understood now that once the barrier breaks down and lets more things in, it causes obviously neuroinflammation and can impair the functioning of the brain, and then that can lead to all sorts of problems. So what actually happens as well during high intensity training is that it produces this this VEGF thing, which is vascular endothelial growth factor, and so this stimulates more blood cells to be produced, and almost like a repairing function on the blood-brain barrier. So I'm like, okay, so hold on a minute, let's just think about this. You've got this BDNF, which is obviously released during fasting, and you can have it during sort of, it's usually like hormetic responses that get stimulated, but you can do this interval training. It stimulates BDNF. It also helps you to repair your barrier in your brain. And I'm talking like absolutes here, and then also it helps reduce and improve your heart health. So it reverses the aging of your heart. So I'm like, this is nuts. Like I never thought it was actually that important to do. And so now obviously once a week I'm sort of putting it in. Like last night I did it with skipping actually, and it doesn't have to just be sprints. It could be battle ropes, or you can do loads of different things as long as you're kind of maxing out your effort and heart rate. And it's actually quite nice because you do get this massive rush after you do it, and unlike so much you kind of, when you do sort of sub-effort exercise, I find you kind of come away, but you don't get that massive flood of endorphins. And I have to admit, like, it was something that I spent probably about 2 weeks writing that blog on it, because I just felt there was so much in there that we hadn't even sort of thought about. And we kind of, even if it's like high intensity but not max heart rate, they look at like exercise snacks. So they've done this with diabetics type 1 and type 2, that if you were to like engage in a series of like squats for like a minute, as many squats you do in a minute, okay, and then go and have some food, the thing about the lactate being produced is that the lactate is a stronger signal for the muscles to uptake glucose. So that's the thing, is that, you know, the best time to take any supplements really is like post-exercise, isn't it? Within like 1 hour, because your muscles are in this repair stage and they want to basically absorb everything they can. But one of them is like GLUT4, so it's like a signaling molecule that comes to the outside of the cell and basically causes glucose to be sucked in. But when lactate is signaling that GLUT, you have more of them that come up. So it's a more powerful response. So if you are struggling with blood sugars, you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, or you just want to be slightly healthier, then these exercise snacks before or after your food is going to be more beneficial for regulating that blood sugar. And you know, and I think it's really important because like when you're sedentary, you kind of, you know, when you go and make a cup of tea, that, I mean, putting the kettle on takes maybe a minute, and you could just be doing some squats. Because, you know, when we work on Fridays from home, you know, we could like sit there for like 4, I mean, you're better than I am, but I stand up all day at work for like 12, 13 hours. But then if I'm doing work at home, I just get so in the zone that I'm just like, and I don't really move. So I think for people, it's like a good reminder. But I do now, you know, I go up and do some pull-ups, I go and do some sit-ups and some chin-ups. I've done that for like a while now, but it's easy and you can just incorporate that into everyday life. So
yeah, no, really interesting. So I've got a few questions there because I think just kind of wrapping my own head around it. The first thing is, so you said that zone 2 is 180 minus your age.
Yeah.
Right? How does one determine max heart rate, right? How do you...
Yeah. So yes, that's a good question. So that's sort of 220 minus your age.
Okay, fine. So there is an equation to that as well.
So 220 minus your age, and then you kind of work out what 80% of that is.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just like sometimes understanding like what that is, because you know, it's very difficult to say what your max is, because on one day it's going to be different to the next day, and you know, same thing with lifting weights. Today I was in the gym today doing a dip workout, basically dip focused, and it starts off by doing a test set. So you do as many as you can to failure, right? And what was interesting was like a few sets later, once I'd done a few more sets of dips, my body was far warmer and far used to the neuromuscular movement of that thing, and I got more. I could do more reps on the third set than I did on that first test set. No, so the first test set wasn't necessarily a true reflection of my absolute rep max for dips. So what I'm saying is that conditions can often change that. So it's good to know. It's like, was it 220 minus your age?
Yeah, and again, a bit like that as well. You know, with your body, you know, HIIT training is interesting because we always associate with just anaerobic. So you're just consuming oxygen during it because the effort that you're putting in is basically requiring you to just respire without oxygen because you're going as hard as you can. But actually they found that it's very much balanced between aerobic and anaerobic. So that's why runners and things like that put it in their training, because it is so beneficial. And like, it's interesting actually about that, because when they look at like the injury rate, don't they, you know, for athletes, if they are training hard in the morning, then your rate of injury is higher than because you naturally warm up slightly more in the evening time. You know, I thought, it's quite interesting you said that. Yeah,
so that's good. The next thing is, when it comes to the 4x4, let's say, as a protocol, does it matter what you do at the high intensity in terms of the exercise prescription? Like, does it have to be sprints? Does it have to be jogging? Could you do battle ropes? Could you do pull-ups? Is it just max effort anything, or that's maybe one question. Maybe another part of that question is, what did the study use in that to get the results they did over 2 years?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it was running.
Okay.
Yeah, so, or like, you know, using, you know, just like shuttle runs or things like that. You can use things like circuits. It's more so the thing is with like, because you're trying to improve VO2 max, when you go and get your VO2 max checked, usually what would happen is if you did a cycle VO2 max and you did a running VO2 max, then your VO2 max on the cycle will be lower because you're basically respiring with less muscles. So the more muscles you engage with running, obviously it's pretty much all muscles are engaged, back, arms, legs, everything. So you tend to get more of a better VO2 response, because it's all about didn't really mention this, but increasing your sort of VO2 max, was a volume of oxygen you kind of intake in 1 minute, and that is a really important metric for sort of overall health. And I think it's something like, if for every 1 milliliter, or I don't remember what the actual unit was, but it's every increase of 1 in your VO2 max equals to an increase in 45 days of life expectancy.
Okay.
So, small increments or small changes do have a huge impact on longevity and stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then so the other thing as well with that is, so when they looked at people's hearts and they looked at the change between a 50-year-old heart to a 30-year-old heart, what was it that they observed that changed in those hearts to kind of be comparable to a 30-year-old heart versus a 50?
So I don't know. I didn't go into this sort of deep physiology bit. I think it was more the elasticity of the heart, because obviously that's a big thing that tends to sort of change as you get older. Yeah. So they found, and I think also it was
its function, I guess.
Yeah.
Just general functionality.
Yeah. And I think like cardiac output and things like that would have changed. And yeah. So, but it's quite incredible, really.
Yeah. No. It's really cool. Really cool. I just think just kind of clarifying that. So it's really, really interesting. I think and so I have heard before, and I don't know much about it, but is there a relationship between doing HIIT training and increasing overall aerobic capacity? So let's say you've got someone who does some degree of mid-distance running, cycling, swimming. Is there anything to suggest that like doing HIIT training actually increases people's performance in a kind of mid-distance or even long-distance capacity?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I kind of also took it from that podcast with Willem. I didn't realise how much, he does 1 or 2 sessions a week of that. I spoke to him today actually, and he said, I still managed to do 50 or 60 miles last week of running, which is insane. But he is still doing those splits and I hadn't really understood that it was actually such a critical part because of actually improving your aerobic fitness. Because the thing with aerobic fitness is that when it comes to respiring, we've got 40,000 calories of us as fat, and our sort of slow twitch muscle fibers tend to prefer fat oxidation. So when you then go and start respiring for longer periods of time, you'll then want to just solely have glucose. You want to move away from glucose and have more fat.
Sure.
And therefore the mitochondria will be used up more. Hold on.
We interrupt this podcast.
Yeah.
For some parenting.
Short interval break from the son kicking the football at the door.
I just want to interrupt today's podcast. Josh and I have spent the last 8 years trying to work out how we can get minerals into our body during our fast without breaking it. So me such as research, right? So we thought, well, why don't we make some? And therefore other people seem to have the same problem, so we can solve that problem for them. So that's exactly what we've done. We've spent 3 years developing this product, and now we have just brought it to market. So if you want to go and try and see how much better it makes you feel having electrolytes during your fasting period, then go over to the website now. It tastes delicious, and I can promise you that it's going to make your fasting experience so much better. So don't just take our word for it. Go over there, grab some today. So when an athlete is out running, you want to train more in zone 2, because what it does, I'm not a coach, but from what I've read and speaking to Gwilym for that, is that what it does is, the reason why you do zone 2 is that you want to get your body better at utilizing energy from fat, because obviously you'll be able to run for longer using fat stores, and you will then solely rely on glucose. So what happens is, if you train at zone 2, so it feels quite slow at the start, but obviously what happens is, as your aerobic or capacity increases, you're then relatively able to go faster and faster and faster at a lower heart rate and stay in that zone 2 band, which means then you can respire for longer, because your energy source is more primarily going to be fat. So Gwilym said the other day that he did, so 2 hours before he goes out, he has a carbohydrate drink, and then he will have his Naru Revive, and he starts taking that an hour before he goes, and he also have 5 grams of glycine, which is what we recommended him to do. And he said the other day he went out for an hour 50, and he only used 1 gel. And this was interesting because beforehand he was saying, like, I'm getting 45 minutes in and I'm starving. And he was like, it's something that I hadn't had before. So what was interesting, I'd sort of said to him, oh, cracky, you know, I don't know what's really changed. And when he actually started taking, like, Naru Revive 1 hour before, he felt that when he then came to exercising, that he'd, you know, the response he'd got was just more better than he's ever had. Normally in that time he would usually do 2 or 3 gels. So going from that, so it basically means his then ability to access energy from fatty acids, obviously from fat, is improving. And you can just see that 1 gel in like almost an hour and 50 is quite impressive. So.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Yeah. It's just good to see it being played out with these kind of things, because I think when you read about these things and talk about these things, they can appear quite stale and academic, and then it's good when you get someone like Gwilym, who's, you know, he's an elite marathon runner, was at 2:35 his marathon time is. It's good to see that when you apply these things practically, someone like reporting the benefits of it, because I think that otherwise it's just one of those things you just read about and you go, oh, well, the research says it's impactful, but then you don't actually know if it actually makes sense in real life. So that's really good.
He did a club championship the other day, and he came 14th, and I like worked at the maths, and I think he was doing like a 5 minute 48 mile.
It's ridiculous.
Or something like that, and I was like, that's insane. He goes, oh yeah, I know, but it was only just like a training thing. He was like, it wasn't like overly going for it. And I was like...
And that's also the average, right?
I had a heart attack.
Yeah, I know, yeah. Well, that's a funny thing, if you ever see people like try and run at Eliud Kipchoge's pace on a treadmill, which is the guy who ran like the sub 2 hour marathon. Yeah. Like, it's just, people can't sustain it for like more than 30 seconds. And it's like his average marathon pace. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, it's just crazy.
Yeah. So, what have you got for us today then?
So this week I thought it'd be interesting. I had a call with a friend who just has been doing fasting for a while now on our recommendation, and he started to ramp up towards, he's doing 24-hour fasts, and he kind of wants to explore the idea of doing more like 3-day fasts and things of this nature. He's been reading a lot, listening a lot to podcasts and information and things of this nature, and he kind of just wanted to have a bit of a chat. So I thought it might be an interesting conversation to kind of share with everyone else, because there's a few good things that came up there. So the first thing was that he's got a cold at the moment, and he was kind of saying to me, should I keep fasting and do my 24-hour fasts, 1 meal a day, even though I've got a cold? And so I said to him, well, look, the first thing you need to do is make sure it is a cold. Right, like figure out when did the cold start, or the symptoms of the cold start, and when did you start changing your fasting routine from doing maybe intermittent 16/8 to doing 1 meal a day? Because as we know, particularly in those early stages of changing that type of eating pattern, your body is using up more and more glycogen, getting more, or if you're fat adapted, your body's using up loads of ketones. So either way, your body's going to get caning through electrolytes. All right, and so just for people that don't maybe understand what I mean by this, when you start fasting, your body starts burning glycogen, which is the stored form of glucose, which is in your muscles and your liver. And every gram of glycogen has 3 to 4 grams of water. So as you're burning through that, there's loads of excess water. The body doesn't need it. It's just more pressure in the pipes, so it wheezes it out. But wherever water goes, salt goes with it. So you start losing loads and loads of sodium in the beginning with that. And typically when people start fasting as well, they're trying to satiate themselves with caffeine as well, so that's going to strip you further of sodium and potassium. And I think what we found wasn't it that the first week, or was it 3 days, that you get 2 grams loss of sodium. So
first week, yeah,
and then it shifts to 1.5. So the point being, and then so that's that side of it. If you've just started fasting, but he was kind of been fasting for a while, so he's probably relatively fat adapted. And what's going to happen there is your body's going to produce ketones, which are negatively charged. And what the body does is, in order to safely remove them from the body, they need to get a positively charged ion to attach to it to allow it to safely leave the body. And electrolytes, sodium, and things of that nature are the things that are used to bind them and then weed them out, which is why you get a different smell to your urine when you're fasting and doing ketogenic diets. It's because the ketones that are being safely removed. So the point being here is that what you really need to figure out was, first of all, when did he start fasting? When was the shift into 1 meal a day? And was he going through kind of fasting flu at that point, which is typically electrolyte deficiency, as we know, because this is one of the main reasons that we created Naru Revive, was that so many people, 40% of people who start fasting continue, 60% stop, and that's because we believe, when you look at the research, they seem to nicely mirror the effects of what they in the literature is keto flu, with the symptoms which is like headache, like sometimes nausea, malaise, fatigue, just the feeling like you might be getting flu or ill or something of this nature. And it's not, it's just you are becoming electrolyte deficient because your body isn't used to the new stimulus. So the first thing was going, right, have you actually got a cold? Because you might not, and you might just have some electrolyte deficiencies which are really easily kind of mitigated. So it was kind of saying, all right, I told him to come and go and get our product, but we had this call about 7:30 at night, so I was like, okay, just try and get half a teaspoon of salt into you in the evening. So I don't need to do anything more. You don't need to be a hero. It's quite late in the day. Just get a little bit of that into you. Allow your body to start reabsorbing the fluid a lot more efficiently, and then just, if in the morning you start, like I said, if over the next week or so, if you're starting to feel better significantly, then it's probably electrolytes once he starts taking the product. However, if you notice that despite taking electrolytes, the symptoms are persisting, then the likelihood is you might have a bit of a bacterial or viral infection that your body just needs to get through. So in the early stages of that cold, if it is one, then the kind of recommendations was, well, look, just listen to your body. If fasting might be something that can help you, at least in the first couple of days of that cold, but just be mindful that fasting, this is a cautionary tale for anyone that's listening, is that fasting is a stress on the body. Right, there is a hormetic response. So what do I mean by that? Environmental hormesis is where we have a small amount of stress that causes a positive response from the body. So an example of this would be lifting weights in the gym. I damage my muscle gets bigger and grows to adapt. I go into the sun, my skin gets burned or damaged by the sun, and it darkens in response, so that next time I go into the sun, it's prepared and it's not as bad. So these are all different things, but fasting is that. You take a period of time without eating, which stresses the system, which then forces the body to adapt to it and become stronger. So what it's about understanding is, if your body is trying to fight an infection, fight a viral and bacterial infection, and that's already a stress on the system, if you then chuck fasting onto it, and particularly longer fasts like 1 meal a day, just be mindful that you're not putting too much on the system at that point, and you might need to just dial back, maybe go to a 16-8, and just let yourself body get through that. Once you've symptoms have subsided from how you're feeling, start rebuilding it up. But it's about understanding. Look, it doesn't matter if we're playing the infinite game here, right? So it doesn't matter if you have to take a week off fasting to get better. It doesn't matter, because we're looking at fasting for the rest of our lives, not just for how can I fast for the next 4 weeks or something. So that was the kind of first thing that we covered, which I hope was interesting for some people here that might resonate with thinking, I'm feeling a bit unwell. Some people say you should fast through it because that's good. Some people say you shouldn't. And I think you just need to listen to your body, understand if you're electrolyte deficient, which a lot of times, even if you have got a bacterial or viral infection, it might just be exacerbated by the fact you're dehydrated, right? Increased like mucus production. When you're blowing your nose and producing those mucus, you're actually losing a huge amount of water and fluid through that production. Coughing as well, we perspire huge amounts of water through it. If you think about other mammals like dogs and cats who can't sweat, they only get rid of heat through panting. So that just shows how much water and heat you can lose through the oral cavity. So
yeah, it's mad. That's really interesting, and I think you brought a really good point, actually, because I went through this a while back when I was training. I don't know what I was training for, but I was doing longer fasts, and I was then trying to go out for really long runs, and I was then having poor sleep on top of that. And it wasn't until and I was like feeling tired, and it wasn't until I sort of like look back, and sometimes you can, if you work in absolutes with health, so people would say, I don't know, like, meat's really good for you. So then people go, right, I'm going carnivore. Mm-hmm. Like, I think like we always get pushed to the extremes, because sometimes what like I think is really important is it's little bits of everything, but done repetitively. As you kind of watch our videos in the morning on Instagram, things like that, we'll tend to say, right, we have, usually tried to have good sleep, we're usually fasting, we're going to do a cold plunge, we're then going to do a workout after, and then we're going to kind of go for, and then we'll go for work, but try and prepare food and things like this. So, cold plunge is a stressor, exercise is a stressor, but you kind of just, like you said, be mindful of it. You slept well, that's fine. If you're quite adapted to fasting, then adding in a cold plunge can be fine. But if you're going in for like 6 minutes when it's icy cold, it's probably gonna be too much. And then what tends to, it's like overtraining. When you go and overtrain, you always say this, whenever you overtrain, you then tend to get ill afterwards. You get a cold and you feel rubbish. So I feel like a lot of the time it's like, no, I've been told that like if I do this, like I get this result, but like life is up and down all the time, and I feel like you do have to adapt your kind of your routine or what you perceive as doing well for you, almost on like a daily basis. You wake up in the morning, and genuinely, if you're doing these things, you're too tired, you're too stressed, you're too overwhelmed, and doing them for the sake of doing them is going to be negatively impactful. Because we always say there's a medication, people are like, oh, I skipped a day of meds. And say, for example, like blood pressure medication or statin medication, we put people on that because we look at the 10-year outcome of that medication. And I find it's like we just have such short time horizons for health. Like if you sort of think, right, well, in this short period, like a week, or even if it's 2 weeks, how is this, I've been feeling really good now for like the last 6 months. Cool. Well, we still want you to be good in 10 years' time. And I have to keep saying, well, cool, well, this thing might dip now, but it's what it's going to look like in 10 years if I keep doing it. I'm going to feel great. So I think it's a really good thing to bring up, because we do tend to work in absolutes of, I've got to do this every day,
Yeah, and look, it's fine to have short-term goals and outcomes you're trying to work towards. If people are trying to lose weight, or if people are trying to lower particular health markers, or whatever it is that they're trying to do in the short term, that's great. But I think it is, like you've correctly said, having that more infinite mindset around, it's not about me achieving this goal. It's like, you don't win the game of health, right? Winning health is about it's not about winning it, it's about staying in it as long as possible, right? And being healthy for as long as possible. You don't. And so the point being is that if there are days where you can't do a thing, that's fine. And I think the problem is that social media these days, it sensationalizes things because it captivates you. So if you see someone who's on their 450th day of doing an ice bath, right, it's not to say that that's what you have to do. It's just that person's done to get enough following, to capture the attention and things of people. Or you see other people, motivational figures, who are saying, don't take a day off. You've got to keep grinding, got to keep doing it. And it's like, no, sometimes you do need a day off, right? But I did hear one that was really good the other day. Actually, it was actually from Jocko Willink, and he said, "What do you say to people who, maybe are feeling a bit fatigued, feeling a bit stressed, a bit let down or whatever, and they don't want to train?" And it was a really interesting response. He just said, he's like, "Yeah, you can have a day off, just not today." And it was like, okay, yeah, we can definitely have a day off, just not today. And what it's about doing, and I'm going to come on to another concept in a minute, but it was about going, sometimes your brain just needs permission to have the time off and know it can happen. Yeah. But if you might, and sometimes these are just good litmus tests where you go, oh man, I really don't want to do that cold plunge. And it's like, okay, you don't have to do it, but you do today.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay, fine, so maybe I can have tomorrow off. And then so what happens is you go and do it, and you get to tomorrow and you're like, oh, I really don't want to do it. And you're like, okay, well, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do cold plunge, but you do today.
I like that. Ed Miner's got a similar thing. It's like one more day.
Yeah, one more day.
And I like that as well, because, he said, he gives the permission, but it's like, okay, well, one more day. and then see how you feel tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I do really like that. You know, I had exactly the same thing this morning. I was like, I could just do it when I get back. And you kind of go, yeah, but okay, that's cool. I got to change. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do it when I get back. And then I like got unchanged. I was like, no, because I'm definitely not gonna do it when I get back. So I'm gonna go out this morning.
Yeah. Well, I think so. There's one more point I want to bring on to, but I do want to make sure that I'm not sounding too contradictory to what I just said, which is that you do sometimes need to take rest and stress and things of that nature, because you do need to understand that if you are doing, like I had to do this recently, I was cold plunging, I was doing some fasting, I was working really, really hard, I was training in the gym, I was doing jiu-jitsu, and I was just like, everything I do in my life and every hobby I have in my life is stressful. I was like, work stressful, like I'm fasting, so my dietary side of things is stressful, like cold plunging is stressful, exercise wise all stress. I was like, I'm doing nothing for downtime here, like nothing is bringing the system down, and no wonder I'm like starting to pick up small injuries or you know, all these different things. And it's, you know, it's that whole thing is like, there's overtraining, and some people say there's no such thing as overtraining, it's under resting, but it's like by the virtue that you can overtrain, it means that you know the opposite is true. So but the reason I'm saying this is I think what we need to become more adapted to is being intuitive with our bodies and being able to hear and listen to what the things are saying. Because the other day it struck me, when you get pain, when you feel anything, all it is your body just speaking to you. Yeah. Your body is literally just talking to you. It doesn't care. It's not giving you pain so that it can tell anyone else. It's literally just telling you, don't do that, or stop doing this, or slow down doing this. And all that signal is a signal to you. And so if you ignore that signal, you are either assuming that you know more than your body does inside, which you don't, right? Or you're an idiot, right? And what I mean by that, in the sense of like, there's an idiocy and a hubris to thinking that you know better than your body, and that you shouldn't listen to that, because you don't, right? And it doesn't matter what paper you read or what scientific research you know, no one knows your body better than your body does, right? Or your brain and all the rest of it. So maybe a bit direct there, but I just want us to understand that there's an intuition that needs to come from this. And so if you're exercising too much, if you're fasting too much, if you're doing whatever, listen to that body response. Now the final thing I wanted to touch on there with the questioning was something that Stephen Bartlett brought up in his new book, which was about the 33 laws for business and life. And what was really interesting in one of those books, he talked about use questions, not statements. And so a statement might be like, I'm not going to do the cold plunge today, right? Which is a very statement. And the problem is with that is that we blinker ourselves to the statements of being like, I'm not going to do the cold plunge today, and your brain goes, okay, cool, we're not doing it today, you know. And it will always take the path of least resistance, your brain, because you have a 2 million-year-old brain designed to find problems. So it always takes that path of least resistance. So then it will reward you for doing that, and it will be happy to know that you're not getting some freezing cold water this morning. However, if you switch out, instead of I'm not going to do cold plunge today, switch it to a question, which is, are you going to do a cold plunge today? And if you keep it so the answer is binary, so it's yes or no, then what happens, you then have to go either yes I am, and you go do it, or it's no, I'm not going to do the cold plunge today. And then suddenly you have to justify and reason why to yourself why you're not going to do it today, right? Because ultimately that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what social media thinks, what anyone else thinks. Actually, the conversation with you is the most important conversation you ever have. It's the one that you have every day with yourself. And so if you say to yourself, am I going to do this cold plunge today? And you say no, now suddenly you have to justify to yourself why you're not going to do that. And we make up excuses and all this kind of stuff. So going back to the whole thing we said about like one, which is like, not, you know, you can take a time off, but just not today. Yeah. And then the other side of things, instead of making a statement about what you're going to do, use it to make a question, because questions challenge beliefs, right? Statements reinforce beliefs. And so it's very inconvenient for us to change beliefs, which is why we don't like to do it. But if you can, it's a really good way of helping to condition that behaviour.
I like that. I think probably we don't talk enough about what we do to, like the stretching and the kind of meditation, the breathing, those types of things that we do, you know, making sure we have family time, and in you know, in connecting with friends and things like that. They're all things that you can do which can obviously improve your overall health, that we're both quite you know, cognizant of doing. But I think because the go-to shift is not people aren't doing enough of the things that are hard work, you then tend to focus I think we do tend to focus more on our conversations and chat about that. So it might be good actually at some point to have a bit of a balance of that. But you are right though. I do like that actually, because sometimes when you talk about it, you kind of go, oh yeah. So like this morning, we got the telescope out and we were going to like pretend to watch the moon landing. So got up at 5:30 this morning and it was cloudy. So I was like, oh, that's cool. And I did like a 45-minute workout last night. And I was like, it's cool. I can do my workout and then go in a cold plunge. And I got there and I was like, oh, right, well, I'm really feeling tired, so maybe I need to eat something. And I was like, well, I don't want to feel like breaking my fast. I'm not even hungry. And I was like, well, maybe I need a coffee. And I was like, well, you always wait like an hour or two for when you wake up. I was like, I don't need to do that. And I stood there and I was like, if I need to do all these things to make me do that workout, to get the energy for it, clearly I'm just too tired to do it. So I was like, if later on, by any chance I'm like, I want to go for a run or something like that, and I feel okay for it, I'm going to go and do it then. But right now, my body's like, no. If I feel like I've got to have a coffee, I've got to eat some food, or I've got to do something else, I'm like, I don't need to do it right now. And like you said, actually, it's quite interesting because doing that, and I think just putting your ego aside and being, well, I always do one in the morning. It's like, well, yeah, but I'm not going to do it this morning, but I will do it today.
Yeah,
and
Now, like when I've been feeling unwell, like I'll still do my cold plunge because I enjoy the feeling I get afterwards, but I'll just shorten the time. Like I don't need to be in there for 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to go in for a minute today because I still get boosting adrenaline, boosting cortisol, which is going to help boost my immune system. So that's going to help me, immediately fighting what my body's going through. But I'm not going to stress it more than it needs it, right? And then whatever. And I think that when you and I are both kind of hardworking individuals, both in our professional lives and our working lives, and I think that we are probably more susceptible to the idea of constantly needing to do something more and more. And I think the reason that message is so strong on things like social media and places like that is that there's so many people who have very low self-will and self-control and that willpower that they need to be told you need to create consistency. You need was it Jocko Willink says that discipline is freedom, and they don't have that discipline muscle. They haven't worked it hard enough for it to grow. And so the point being is that there comes a point where, but when you get people like you and I who are hardworking, what you end up doing is feeling like, oh my god, I'm just not, I feel like I'm just overwhelmed, I should be doing everything all the time. And actually, it's about someone's giving people like you and I permission to go, actually, you know what, you don't need to do this. Where are you going to stop? Knows how to get your attention. I think that sometimes people who are hardworking, dedicated individuals who have a higher level of determination and self-control and impulse control need to know that it's okay to actually have days where you don't train or you're not feeling it. And as long as you get back up on that horse and you keep going, because again, it's about that longer time horizon, and that is missing a workout today going to mean that you don't play the game of health for as long as possible? No, it's not. But actually, what might happen is by allowing yourself to have that day off, you might enjoy the activity more by giving yourself the freedom to know that actually it's not the end of the world if I stop. Yeah. That you can go and do it. It's why people in programs, if you look at good programs, they'll put a deload week in. Right? At the end of a program before, if you choose to, start it again. The reason being is that you've had a level of high intensity, and it's important for the body to deload, come off the weight that it's doing, allow the joints, allow the muscles to rest more, so that you can go back and attack it at greater speed and strength. And I think that there's an important part. It's why we all need holidays, we all need rest, we all need downtime. It's just so we can't just you have to balance the extremes. If you're always up here with the intensity of the life that you live, then you must compensate with that with a lower downtime, right? Because otherwise, if you're always here but your downtime is in the middle, then you're constantly peaking at the top and you don't come down, and that's where you're going to burn out, right? So it's also why when you look at like people in high octane jobs and finance and stuff of this nature, I know a lot of patients of mine who are in the finance world, and you get people who they say play hard and party hard, right? Why? It's because they have such a stressful job that's so intense, so high octane, that they compensate that with going out partying, doing all the drugs, all the rest of it. And all you're doing is seeing people, I'm not saying it's a good thing to do, it's certainly not, but they're compensating for the high and the contrast of, I've got such an intense, crazy life going on. They compensate it with such dips and those peaks and troughs. So what you actually want to do is not have the peaks and troughs. You want to start narrowing the bandwidth so that you get consistency of a tighter bandwidth.
Yeah.
And so you don't just go and exercise loads and loads and loads for a few weeks and then stop for a few months and then you pick it back up. Or the diet, you go into a massive calorie deficit for a few months and lose the weight, and then you go back and eat loads of rubbish, and then you go back into a calorie deficit and then you eat loads of rubbish. What you want to do is find out, how can I maintain that consistency, which is what I love about, if you wouldn't do it for a decade, don't do it for a day. And it's not an absolute, but I think it's a good litmus test for us to think, could I eat like this? Could I exercise like this for the next 10 years? And if the answer is no, then what it means is that at some point along that journey you will stop, right? And you need to be prepared for that. And so if you're saying, could I eat, an animal-based diet for the next 10 years? Yeah, I think it probably could, right? And that's why, when I go back to eating healthier, when I've achieved the weight that I want to, that's what I'm going to go back to doing, because I know that I can do that for a year because I've done it. But anyway, we'll wrap it up
really
there.
Good. Yeah.
That was a good one. And we'll...
Come on, we're motoring through them.
We are.
Yeah, well, look, catch us next week. And, we've got our new intermittent fasting ebook out, if you haven't had a look at it. And quite a lot of the things we discuss and talk about is also in our 28-day intermittent fasting challenge. It is a fasting challenge, but it's almost just like a daily guide of new nutritional, or we go into like a bit about the science about the cold plunge, for example, or we'd go into a bit about keto flu and just talk about general health things, so it's a bit of a guide really rather than an actual challenge. But there are different fasting times there that you can use, so it's a really good resource to have. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Thank you.